And if you're paying attention on a lot of these job postings, the side effect here is, oh, plus or minus $150,000 in base,
Mm.
right? Like it's sort of the outcome of stupidity of these sorts of postings.
So, Chris, and I know you've memorialized a lot of your thoughts around this because you've written a book, you have a number of assets available on your website, and we're going to provide some links to those. So, that hopefully if people want to know more or reach out to you, then they'll be able to do that. And I think that you do talk about in that this whole issue of transparency and pay transparency up and down and through the process. Do you want to just expand on that a little bit further in terms of your philosophy around that as you try and sort of advise the organizations that either you're employed by or that you consult with?
Yeah. So I wrote a book on pay transparency when pay transparency in the US was kind of newish. And it just kind of come into reality with California. And the challenging thing there was the very unrealistic expectations on the part of regulators to require pay transparency, which the gotcha here is you actually need to have pay structure.
Yeah.
So you have to pay ranges. But if you only employ 4 people or 10 people, you don't employ a comp person to establish a job architecture and pay ranges for you. It never happens. You can't afford it anyway, even if you wanted it. And so the flaw there is an assumption that they know what they're doing to be able to establish these ranges, which is why you have, and if you're paying attention on a lot of these job postings, the side effect here is, oh, plus or minus $150,000 in base, right? Like it's sort of the outcome of stupidity of these sorts of postings. Associated with adherence to requirements, right? Before an organization, it's like the best of intended consequences, right? And so one of the points there was just walking somebody through how to set up a structure. If you only have a handful of employees, what does that actually look like? Which means take the time to look at the jobs, right? Look at the essentially internal equity. So you're looking at the incumbent population. How do they stack rank under those jobs? You have to collect the demographics associated with that and vet out where you have to maybe make corrections. It's also ideal if you can afford it to have a look at market data as a point of justification for the reason why certain jobs pay differently than others. And there's plenty of free resources out there, and I kind of point to them in my my early books and follow up blog posts and the like. And that's a lot of it. So it's really intended to be a point of empowerment for those smaller organizations who, like, all of a sudden have to figure out how to be adaptive, or pay the $250,000 fine for every infraction. That has since evolved.
Yeah, or in the case of larger organizations, they work out what all of the side exits out of the regulations are. And so, for example, I see very clear evidence on base pay of, well, the range is this, and it's huge. It's like $120,000 difference between, and it's not just in terms of what your experience is. It's these geographical gates that they create across the country, and they say, well, if you're in California or New York City, then of course you're going to get paid more. And idiots like us who live in the Midwest or in the Mid-South are sat there going, wait a minute. So, I do think that it is kind of interesting that, as in any set of regulations, there are always exception clauses and things like that. And so therefore, the larger companies do find their ways to become opaque again, to reduce that transparency in terms of pay, but still play inside the letter of the regulations.
They can afford to have the lawyers that will give them the guidance on the what you can do to work around the legislation. There's this tendency for certain geographies, certain states to go a little too far, and other ones to maybe not go far enough. And so it's a challenge for, candidly, like organizations that employ people in all 50 states or in all of various countries as well, to kind of go with the least common denominator. Like, what is the least amount of the thing that we have to do to still be in line with the jobs, so that we can do one process. And I kind of get it, you know what I mean? Like I kind of do. At the same time, it's also like, ugh, it's not exactly a savory thing on the part of choice or our actions. So like after doing that, I went on and tried to apply a similar concept of transparency into sales positions as well. And so I wrote this book called Finding Fairness. And that book was all about trying to establish greater transparency in all of the aspects behind the scenes for sales compensation. And so that's where I kind of like, I picked up this one, which was all about base pay. And then I figured, well, how can we do it for essentially establishing a comp plan, which in this case is about clarity of job responsibility, involving more people into the target setting process, being clearer about just the quotas and budget allocation, improving financial acumen amongst the sales population, and on and on.
Yeah, it's interesting because, oftentimes I used to, when I was coaching salespeople that worked for me, one of my favorite phrases to all of them was, if you don't know what to do on a given day in your job, read your comp plan. Because basically that is your set of instructions from the company. Defines your territory, defines what you'll get paid on, and so on and so forth. So I think, I've always tried to argue that the compensation plan should basically be your set of marching orders as to what the company is asking you to do. Now, sometimes that becomes challenging because that clarity isn't there, or there is, conflicting information there. And I think that experienced sales professionals over time develop this kind of sixth sense that when a comp plan is issued for a new fiscal period, that they read through it and they start the what I call the reading the chicken's entrails of the chicken, because the chicken is there, but they're like, okay, now I need to get into this a little bit and work out what is really to my advantage here, and sorting through to basically parse down what they think is actually very important. And I know just from being part of sales communities inside companies that oftentimes a lot of the discussion between the individual contributors was, all right, what does this really mean? I know that they're promoting this product, but that's got a lead time of this, which means it's actually, I'm not going to be able to achieve this wonderful, bonus that they're going to associate with that because the sales cycle is too long. And so therefore this comp plan is not going to be meaningful to this brand new product that has come through, because even if I start selling it now, it's probably not going to land for 18 months. So therefore I can kind of ignore that piece that's there. And I think that's part of, what you're saying in terms of in the background. So I'm going to let Bethany approach this from the individual contributor perspective, looking at 2026 going forward. But for sales leaders who are the CRO and his team who might be sort of advocating for various adjustments to the compensation plan, as most sales leaders inevitably do, to try and either retain their people or, to support a particular product they think is important. What advice do you give to sales leaders as they're contemplating the new fiscal and how they can try and influence the design of the comp for the coming year?
Well, I tend to be an advocate of making sure that you're doing your homework to start off with, which in this case means if you have a particular opinion, let's validate that in some form or fashion before you take it to the next step, right? And so let's say a question of, I don't feel like my folks are as motivated as they could be. Great one, right? I think there's a lot of people that there's also a lot of people who will say something to the extent of I don't feel like, and we've lost a couple candidates. I'm not sure if we're competitive, right? Fair enough. So those are like two big ones that might come up every, probably they never stop, most likely. But there's a little bit of like, okay, let's dig in on this. Let's figure out what the root cause is. And now, ideally, you have some help in the organization. I don't know, maybe you don't. but you want to go and find out. So like from a competitive perspective, there are resources to go and investigate the total target cash compensation side of a sales incentive plan. And if you're in tech sales, you should have heard of something called repview.com as an example. Now it's just one data source, but it is something that exists that people know to go to if they're wanting a sort of point of comparison. There's also other, like other things that just by scrolling through LinkedIn or any of the job postings to kind of get an idea of the ranges of pay. Obviously, there are some problems with that, as we all know. But there's also very, very one of the things I think that are underutilized is call some of your recruiter friends. Those people know what's going on at all damn times, and they'll be able to speak to kind of what it is that those, what is it that's going on. Now that's going to give you like a comp, like a maybe the skeleton, right? If you want the innards of that, you may want to look at something, like my book or like my blog posts. Because if you don't want to pay for my book, you can certainly go through and read the same thing in so many of the blog posts that really just point out a specific issue.
No, but please go and buy Chris's book.
I mean, I'm biased. I think it's pretty good.
This is a Haverin Best Bit, an excerpt from a full podcast episode. If you'd like to listen to that podcast episode, there'll be a link at the end here, or you can visit our channel. Alternatively, just browse this playlist and you'll find more best bits to enlighten and entertain. Keep Haverin.